Welcome to In the Green Room. I'm Kinga.
I'm Chet, and we've got Paul in the studio today, co-hosting with us. Welcome back, Paul.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Paul Kassir from RVnGO.
Yeah.
Thank you for being our sponsor. We are so excited that you are here. Can you introduce yourself?
I'm Stewart Horejsi, born and raised in Salina, Kansas.
A legend in his own time. So Stewart, I was really looking forward to this interview. You've had some claims to fame. Particularly, I guess you became famous when Forbes, Warren Buffett disclosed there was a couple of secret billionaires on his shareholder list, and Forbes went digging, and they found you. So can you tell us a little bit about that whole story on, how you got to investing in Berkshire Hathaway?
Well, I belonged to a mountain climbing club in Portland, Oregon called the Mazamas. And we had a small trust fund, and the guy that ran that trust fund introduced me to an author. And then I got a book of his and read it, and he mentioned there was a whole chapter in there on Warren Buffett, and it just leapt out off the page to me. I really liked it. And so just before I moved out of Portland, Oregon, I bought 100 shares for $265.
That's
What a deal.
So let's give away the secret. Is the secret to buy low and sell high?
No, Warren Buffett says his favorite holding time's forever, and I agree with that. When I moved back to Kansas, my broker was Merrill Lynch, and he kept calling me and said, you need to sell your Berkshire and buy this. And I told him, well, I'm willing to buy from you if you'll promise me you'll never call me. And he didn't.
But there's a reason for that, right? They're usually just calling you to churn the stock.
Exactly. Yeah. Because I went from $265 to about $430,000 today, and he hadn't made a penny.
So what are other tips that you learned from Warren Buffett?
Well, I think one of the things that really stood out for me was his integrity.
Integrity.
Yeah. That's a really important part of it.
I know you said your dad and Warren Buffett are your heroes.
Yep.
Why?
Well, my dad, I mean, they're both really nice. I would say both really gentle.
Gentle. Okay.
Yeah,
I
and
think
really
you're
honest,
gentle.
so.
I think you're gentle.
Well, thank you.
It's great to see good guys finish first.
Yeah.
Now, before Portland, I mean, even $265 for 100 shares, and that was I think in 1980.
Yes, it was.
So, I mean, that's still a lot of money. I mean, kind of give us some of the background on how you got to the stage where you can even, kind of make that pivot and that thought.
Well, when I graduated from the University of Kansas, I really wanted to go to New York. I wanted to be on Wall Street. And they were building missile silos near Salina, Kansas, where my dad had a small welding supply company. And it was kind of overwhelming him taking stuff out the missile silos. And so I went back to help him. And then I got stuck there. But I didn't mind it. I never regretted it. It was always fun.
Yeah. And, I mean, you grew that business to a pretty healthy and profitable business. So what made you think about pivoting out of the welding business?
Well, our trade association published, I think, a quarterly newsletter, and they always showed in it they had a chart of the profitability of the industry. And it wasn't straight down, but the trend was straight down. And so finally I decided that I wouldn't do that anymore.
And so, I mean, I think you pivoted on that, right? And you made a few decisions, take the profits from that company and maybe not reinvest it into a business. Don't double down on something that's going down, but maybe double down on something that's going up. Warren Buffett was one of those. I mean, you were one of the first investors. I mean, what was it like being one of the first ones in?
Yeah. I guess my first shareholder meeting would have been in April of 1981. And when I went there, the meeting was in the basement of National Indemnity Insurance in Omaha, and there were only about 12 of us there. and they were just friends of his, and so they talked for a little bit, and then it was over. So then in future years, I always brought friends back, and I planted questions with them to ask him. And we kept
Such
it
as
going
what?
then.
What type of questions?
Oh, financial questions, business questions. Yeah.
Such as? Can you remember anything?
No, not from 1980.
Are there secrets?
Are we making money? Well, no, I mean, it started at 12, and now those events are like a huge convention with tens of thousands of people attending, and takes over Omaha, Nebraska, and all of the products that Berkshire Hathaway own are on there. I guess one of your little claims to fame is I think you own more Berkshire Hathaway stock than Bill Gates.
Well, that's what they said. I don't know how many he's got.
So what do you admire most about Warren Buffett?
I would say creativity and honesty. And he's humble, very humble. A friend of mine was vice chairman of Mace Rich, and they had a jewelry store or some kind of a store in a mall in Seattle, and Warren was there. And I think it was their jewelry store or something. I think they were just opening it, and Warren was there. And so my friend went up and introduced himself, told him it was a friend of mine. And then and the cameraman had started to leave, and Warren had the cameraman come back. And then Warren leaned over and whispered in my friend's ear, and he says, "Now listen," he says, "you tell him that he's going to ask you what I'm talking about, and you tell him I'm giving you a stock tip, and you promise not to ever reveal it. You can't tell him."
Now, it's funny you say that about Warren Buffett, because that's a little bit of your background too. After the welding company, tell us about some of the things, that was successful in its own right, but then you really took the profits from that and pivoted into, a huge level of success. And I think people would love to hear, I'd love to hear about, what were some of those things, the opportunities you found and the creativity.
Yeah, I really profited off of two global shortages. One was welding wire. I mean, most people think of welding as electrodes or sticks, but most of the manufacturing welding is now all done with wires on a spool, and then you blow the sheltering gas over the weld puddle. You don't have any flux. But when the world went from nylon belted tires to steel belted tires, the world didn't have enough drawing capacity to draw enough small diameter wire for both, and so welding wire got really scarce. And I don't know how I did it, but I ended up buying it from some company in Japan and one in Korea, and also from Italy. And but I imported all the wire, whereas there were about 100,000 welding supply distributors in the United States when I went into the business, and I think I was the only one that brought in imported wire. Everybody else just stayed with, that was almost an addiction to their current suppliers, and they didn't venture outside that.
And with that, you were able to supply, basically in a monopoly situation, the only person supplying welding wire, because everybody else was tapped out trying to make steel belts and weld.
For a while, that was true, and I brought in the port of Portland, Oregon, where I was living at the time, was the second busiest port on the West Coast. Los Angeles was first, and Portland was second. And I brought in the biggest shipment of containerized cargo that had ever come into the port of Portland. We brought in 3 million pounds of welding wire.
Wow, that's incredible.
There you go. Think big.
Wow, that's amazing. So, Chet, do you have a question?
One question I had is, it says one of your secrets to success is you had an ability to say no when investments weren't looking good. So what were some investments that you said no to because you were like, that's too risky?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I did think that was an important part of my career, was saying no, but I don't remember any of the things I turned down.
Okay, yeah, I was going to say, and then a follow-up question, were there any that you maybe regretted saying no to? Like, were there any investments that you were going to go in on and then you didn't end up going well, or no?
That's a great question. I need you to...
Yes,
No, it's all good.
It is a good question, but I don't have any answers. Yeah, I don't remember that.
It was a little bit of a curveball, but yeah, let's continue. Yeah.
Well, from your biography, there was a couple. So You know, when I look at your bio and your history, you really find opportunities where there's scarcity, and then you solve it. And you come in there, and a lot of it's with innovation. But with that scarcity, you were looking at, for instance, investing in New York City taxi licenses and gondola licenses. I mean, I think that was a no on your part, and in hindsight.
That's you're absolutely right. Yeah, in both cases. And I looked at those gondola licenses, and there were just 1,000 of them in Venice, and you had to have one to operate a gondola. And I thought, man, that would really be neat to buy the licenses and lease them. And the same thing in New York City, there were 1 million taxi medallions, and I thought about buying some taxi medallions and renting them out. And I thought, both of those cases, the limited supply was determined by the government. And I just felt the government could change that at any time and your market would go away. Yeah. So I didn't do either one of them because of that.
The scarcity wasn't real. It was, and you probably know that from your first degree at KU in economics, where that wasn't an economic scarcity, that was a government-imposed or a legislative scarcity, and that could go away with a stroke of a pen.
Yep,
so it's a good lesson.
Yeah. Actually, my bachelor's degree was in industrial management. So people that graduate go to the business school. Most all of them take liberal arts for the first 2 years, and the business school the last 2 years. I took engineering the first 2 years, and then business the last two, and that was an industrial management degree.
Good thing you didn't invest in taxis. Now that there's Uber and Lyft and all these rideshare apps, taxis are not.
Is like Uber on gondolas? Like, can you do a gondola with Uber?
I don't
Look into
know
it. Look into it.
But you know, Venice is really drying up. It's sinking into the ocean, and there's not.
That's going to have its own challenges.
Traffic there,
Yeah.
So I know that you were in a fraternity and you learned a lot from that. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I really did. I thought that was a very important part of my growing up. I grew up as an only child and from a small town, and I think there were 254 in my graduating class in high school, and so the fraternity was very important. I thought we had a really good house mother. We had a really good president. We had strict rules, and they were enforced by boards, and those boards were very painful. And but I never did see an abuse of the use of boards. They were always used when there was one of the rules violated. And then when anybody got 15, you got a stick for violating a rule. When anybody got 15, then we all had to go down in the basement, and the 15 guys would run by and swat us on the run. So.
No, but in all
sounds
seriousness,
crazy in this day. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it hurt.
I don't really agree with that, but you seem to be okay with that.
There's some fraternities that do way weirder stuff out there, so it's mild.
But
really?
Yeah, there's some weird stuff that happens in the South, like down at some of the SEC schools, like Alabama. I had a friend that was Sigma.
No details.
Sigma Chi down there. Yeah. Oh, I won't say any of the details on the air. It'll be too dirty. So.
But I think you were one of the stories you were sharing with us was, you were thinking of, well, is this even the right fit for me? And then president of another fraternity said, well, stick it out because it's kind of a microcosm of life.
Well, actually, yeah, I was thinking about resigning because I didn't like the pledge trainer. Mm-hmm. And then the president, who I say was really a very sharp guy, and he had one eye, he had a glass eye, but he was really a bright, nice guy. And he stopped me and he says, I hear you're thinking about resigning. I said, yes. And he said, why? And I said, well, because I don't like the pledge trainer. And he says, well, he says, think of this. This is a laboratory of life. And he says, you learn how to adjust to things. You learn how to deal with people here. And he says, I guarantee you, when you get out on the job somewhere, you're going to meet a guy just like that you don't like. And he says, if you learn how to deal with it here, it won't penalize you. But if you learn to deal with it out there, it could cost you a lot.
So that's really smart. So it was a big learning lesson.
Yeah, very much so.
And it was really nice that your mentor.
And that's huge advice in today's day and age, because there's so many people, like in my generation, that get so triggered and so angry so quickly, and they're not willing to work with the other side. So I think that's a really important sentiment, that just because you initially aren't getting along with somebody doesn't mean that you can't end up working together in the end. So I think that's an important lesson.
I sure agree with that.
Yeah.
I think it makes you more resilient as well. So who would you say was your first, real mentor outside of Warren Buffett? Would you say it was your mom, your dad?
My dad, for sure.
Your
Yeah.
dad, okay. And you had a very loving household.
I sure did. Yeah, my parents lost two daughters younger than I am, and so
So
I
sad.
think it was a sad household. But they were sure nice to me. I think I got the love for all three. I think I got spoiled.
It sounds like a quintessential Midwest upbringing.
And so you raised your kids that way as well.
Well, I hope so.
Yes.
Yeah,
Because I know
think
you're
so.
pretty close with your kids.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful, beautiful thing. So, who is one of the most exciting people you've ever met?
Other than us.
Yeah.
I was hoping you'd say Rod Stewart.
Well, no, I think the most exciting experience I had was he was a U.S. senator from Ohio. I can't remember his name now, but he took us out. We went out on a what they call a COD, carrier onboard delivery, and we took me out to the John S. Stennis, which at that time was the longest nuclear aircraft carrier in the world. They said when the United States builds one, they build it 3 feet longer. So the Reagan and the Bush are both longer now. But when I was out there, and that was an exciting day. Yeah. We stood right out there when the fighters were coming in, and this carrier had just returned from the Straits of Hormuz, and he said the admiral said we had 172 targets, and we destroyed 172 targets.
There you go.
And but he was really unhappy because they were supposed to catch the middle wire when they landed, and they weren't doing it right. It was some new pilots, and it was a new crew. They were restocking after coming back from the Straits of Hormuz. So.
All right. Yeah, that'd be cool. Landing on an aircraft carrier and to live the tale.
So we talked about a little bit about the money you made doing tax lien in Arizona. So if we could touch on that, because the way you did business with that was kind of honorable. You weren't evicting people when, some ruthless businessmen would just kick them out. So if you would go into detail a little bit about how you kind of changed the game.
Well, that's true. When people didn't pay their taxes, I think it was 2 years they had to pay their taxes. If they didn't pay them, then we had the right to foreclose. It was the best loan business in the world. We were loaning on the same houses that the savings and loan were loaning on, and they were getting 7 or 8%. We were getting 16%.
So that's better, right?
Yeah, and if the savings and loan foreclosed, our lien was still in place. If we foreclosed, the savings loan either had to pay us off or lose their position. We had a prime position. So it was the best loan business in America at the time. And it was kind of fun. But then I didn't like evicting people out of their homes. So then back in that day, I made the rule that we weren't going to buy anything that was less than $10,000 of tax, because I thought in almost all cases that would be commercial property then rather than residential.
And then you did one more thing. You invented the forbearance loan.
I did. That was in order to avoid kicking those people out.
How did you go about inventing that? I mean,
just came to me.
Well, yeah. Well, you saw the need to not evict these people that were still trying to get correct on their tax payments. You know what I mean? So give them a chance to at least pay it back.
Yeah, I gave our attorney developed, it was just a couple pages, but it was a forbearance agreement, and we agreed to forbear our right to foreclose if they paid us some amount each month. And so we were getting that at the same time we were accruing the taxes on the property itself. So it was a really good deal. And it was a good deal for them. It was a good deal for us.
A win-win.
Win-win, which are the best kinds of deals for sure.
1,000%.
So, another great example of being innovative, but also with integrity. Creative and innovative.
Yeah, and there's so many different industries you touched in. You're like a Swiss Army knife. There's not just one thing you did, because I was reading on your bio too that you were in the dry ice business, right?
Well, yeah, we were, because we had liquid CO2 and we would
tell
turn
us about that.
into
We want to
dry
hear all
ice.
about it.
Yeah, so we sold the McDonald's and everybody.
Did you invent it? Dry ice?
Oh no, but
I don't know who invented it.
I don't know either, but it's just we just used our liquid CO2, and then when it evaporates, that cools it even more, and it turns into dry ice.
Yeah, and so you were supplying carbon dioxide manufactured through dry ice to all the fast food restaurants all over the U.S.
That's correct.
And
And
then
then
you-
it's
and-
also a shielding gas for some welding.
Right, and then you also had a technology above that creative idea. You went high tech and used aluminum canisters, and could do. Standard was in the past 500 psi's. You did 2,500 psi's, so it's like 5x the amount of 5 times less cargo area, less volume, 5 times more shipped per shipment.
Yeah, the multiple's not right, but the idea is right.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, and I did. I mean, now you look in the hospital and all the cylinders are aluminum, but in those days they were steel, and I was the first one I think that started bringing out the aluminum ones, and
Right.
then we filled them, and then we sold nitrous oxide, which I think it was mostly used by dentists to calm down their patients. while they were
And Inspector Clouseau in his interrogation techniques in Pink Panther Strikes Again.
I love those movies. Chet grew up watching those movies over and over.
Peter
and over
Sellers
again.
is a legend. Yes.
Fantastic.
Your nose is melting.
So I know you've been all over the world. How many countries would you say? I mean, you've been.
I'm not sure, but quite a few. That was kind of interesting because I think we were living in Phoenix at the time, and I had some business in London, and so my wife called up to get us 2 round-trip first-class tickets to London, and I think it was, if I remember right, it was like $22,000, and my wife must have groaned, and the clerk said, "Well, have you called the Around the World desk?" And my wife said no, so we called the Around the World desk, or she did, and then we could get 2 first-class tickets and go all the way around the world for $6,000. And you could make as many stops as you want. You could make one side trip, but you couldn't come backwards. And we did that 3 times. So,
Really?
Yeah.
Is that still available?
That-
yeah, I
is-
think it is. Actually, I've got a friend from Barbados who was right-hand man for Li Ka-shing, who was supposed to be the wealthiest Asian in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And so he spends part of his time in Hong Kong, part of his time in London. He is Canadian, so he's got family in Canada. So he always uses the round-the-world trip. He goes the opposite direction. He goes Hong Kong, London, Canada, and then wherever else he wants to go, and finally ends up back in Hong Kong.
Cool. Speaking of China, I hear you had an interesting train ride in China.
I did. I slept with the commandant of the Chinese army.
Chet, have you heard this story?
So how
I'm excited to hear it.
This is a great story.
how do you sleep with the commandant of the Chinese army? Is this like
Well,
Is this on the
I've
menu?
been to a trade association meeting in Hong Kong, and afterwards, my wife and I flew up to, in those days it was Peking, before it became Beijing. And then we were going to take the train. We spent a few days in Beijing, and then we were going to take the train back to Hong Kong. And we were in a private cabin, which would accommodate 4, but there were only 3 of us there, my wife and I, and a retired professor from West Point. And we were coming into it was dinner time, and we were coming into a train station, and our guide came and told my wife she had to go sleep in a different cabin because there were 2 Chinese men that were going to sleep in here. And so I went down to the train.
Well, explain that, though. How can they just come in and tell her to go somewhere else?
What was China?
Yes. what part of China didn't you get?
Yeah, you don't really get to argue there. It's kind of
That's right. So at any rate, on my way down to the dinner car, I walked through a few train cars where the Chinese army soldiers were, and the stalls were 13 deep. You just had to slide in flat to have a bunk on each side of the aisle. And when I came back, there were these 2 Chinese gentlemen in there, and they were both in military clothing, and we shook hands, and everything was nice. They were very friendly. And I asked our guide, I said, well, they must be very high-ranking. And she talked to them, and she said, yes. But I said, they don't have any stars or anything. I said, why is that? She talked to them in Chinese, and she came back, and she says, well, when they're on the job, everybody knows who the boss is. And when they're off the job, they're all equal. But it was obvious to me some were more equal than others because they weren't back in those bunks back there.
Right.
So at any rate, my wife left, and it came time to go to bed. Well, the guy from West Point, he stayed there with his foot on the lower bunk, and so that the Chinese guys had to sleep upstairs. And then when we finally went to bed, sometime during the middle of the night, the guy above me had to go to the bathroom, and he came down, and I noticed he had a hole in his socks. And he went to the bathroom, came back. But then the next afternoon when we were coming into Hong Kong, they got off then somewhere. And the next afternoon we were coming to Hong Kong, my guide came up and said, Mr. Stewart, she says, when you get home, you can tell your friends you slept with a very important general. And I said, really? And she says, yes, he's the commandant of the entire Chinese army.
Oh, my gosh.
And I said, really? I said, oh, my gosh. I said, how many are in the army? 1 million? 2 million? She says, please, Mr. Stewart, it's a very big army.
It's the Chinese Red Army.
That's an incredible story.
Tens of millions. And
So tell us about some other stories of your world travels and what's on your bucket list. Where do you still want to go?
Well, I'm probably not going to go too many places now. I'd still like to see Moscow, and I'd like to see the pyramids. But, yeah,
Those are good choices.
yeah.
Yeah.
Did you
What are
always take
your-
your kids? Oh,
I was going to say, what were your top 3 favorite countries you've been to? Because you said you've been to so many. We don't really have time to cover all of them, but there's 3 that, I'm a traveler. I haven't been to that many places yet, so I want to pick your brain a little bit and hear where I need to go.
Well, I really liked Hong Kong. I don't know how it is now since it's gone back to China. I haven't been there since then, but it was really a fun place. And then I think I may be prejudiced, but I don't think so. I've talked to a lot of people. Prague is unbelievably beautiful. It's really a special place. And I had friends there, so that probably impacted it. But I really enjoyed my time in London. And,
London, okay.
Yeah, and I spend the winters now in Barbados, and probably 80% of my friends there are from London or from England, and so.
Yeah, I'll second all that. I've been to all those places. They're all spectacular. London, Prague, Hong Kong, Barbados. And all you need to know about Barbados, they made 4 Concords. They gave 2 to the French, 2 to the British. One of those flew from Heathrow to JFK every day. The other one flew to Barbados every day.
Only once
and
a
back.
week to Barbados.
Oh, all right. Well,
Every Saturday.
Well,
Because
how
we'd
did
be
you
out in the
find-
swimming pool playing, and then we'd yell, Concord time. We'd stop and have a Concord party and watch it go by. But it didn't take very long.
so how did you decide I want to go to Barbados and live there?
Well, I was buying sulfur hexafluoride from the Chinese Army way out in western China, and it's a fluorine gas, and so the world outlawed Freon. And so everybody had to reconfigure their fluorine plants, and they no longer got sulfur hexafluoride as a byproduct. And I had been buying it for $2.50 a pound and selling it for $3.50 a pound. Seems reasonable. And then when they had to reconfigure their fluorine plants, they no longer got it as a byproduct, and I was virtually the only person that had it. The Chinese Army always charged me $2.50 a pound, but virtually overnight I was getting $35 a pound, and I was selling it everywhere. I was selling it in Russia, Egypt, France, everywhere.
I mean, there's the sustainability tie-in when they outlawed, banned fluorine. You came in and filled the void. When they switched from nylon tires to steel belted tires, you came in to fill the void. So I think, if you're looking for business ideas, start with fill the void. Find a gap in the market and fill it. And, back then, it's heavy industrials. It could still be heavy industrials. Could be tech. Could be a service that's missing out there, a piece of software.
You're absolutely right.
Is that advice you would give to somebody that's trying to start out and trying to be more successful?
Well, my advice would be to think outside the box, because the
That's
things
right.
I did were there for everybody to see. And I was the only one that did them. Virtually, I'm the only one that did it.
Right, right. And, that's the funny thing about when you read about a lot of the innovative ideas. I mean, it was all there. The internet was there when Amazon started, and the idea of e-commerce was there, they just did it a different way. Or there's so many success stories. Your success stories are a lot like that as well. It's there, but it's the person who takes the idea and really executes on it.
And evolves.
Yeah, yeah. It's the best ideas are always so obvious after you thought of them, right?
100%.
E equals MC squared is just such a beautiful, obvious formula, but nobody thought of it until Albert Einstein. That's true genius.
Drank a few Coca-Colas and got to the chalkboard. So.
That's right. That's right. Back when they had cocaine in it.
So what advice would you want to pass on to your kids? And what do you want to see for their futures?
Yeah, I would really say think outside the box. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and we got a couple of ideas now that my grandson's 25 and he's in the
like
commercial
Chet.
real estate business. Yeah, and I got a couple ideas that I think are pretty good that I'm probably going to share with them. So.
Or beat him to the punch.
So do you have any massive random regrets with your business life or life in general that you're like, oh, I wish I did this differently, or no?
I do have one.
Okay.
Well, one of Warren Buffett's guidance is it's not really very important how big your circle of competence is, but it's vitally important that you know where the perimeter is. And I got outside my perimeter. I think I said I took over 4 closed-end funds traded on the New York Stock Exchange here in the U.S., and I decided I wanted to do one in London. And the discounts on the closed-end funds over there are really high. And so I was going along just fine, but the market was going down, so the prices were going down. And what was I going to tell you? Do you remember?
Well, then
Or you telling me about the one regret you had? It was the investment you did in London.
So at any
Yeah,
rate,
London
they had
closed-end
a
fund.
law I didn't know about, and that once you've bought more than 30% of the stock, you have to tender for 100% of it at the highest price you paid in the last year.
Oh.
So I guess I think I ended up, my attorney said $300,000 or $400,000, but I could have really lost a lot on that deal. And
that's a doozy because in most of North America, all of North America, it's 90% before you can even get forced into that, and then it's not any kind of formula; it's current valuation. So that is a doozy. That's totally out of left field. Nobody would expect that from North America. So yeah, that's a good example.
yeah.
Well, you, Paul, you have the company RVnGO. Do you ever feel like you need to really tighten the reins and make sure you stay within your perimeter?
We've been building RVnGO now for 5 years, and in that time, I really do think we've learned a lot. I've learned a lot looking back. We never had any gotchas like that, but we've really been digging into it. But I really totally subscribe to that formula. You really don't. You have to know what you don't know, and that's really hard to know where that fuzzy line is. Once your area of expertise grows enough that in the area that you're working in, you kind of know everything you need to know about insurance or marketing or whatever the business disciplines that your company has, and that's a good start. And then and then just have good people around you is what either your own background or experience that what you've got, but other lawyers, accountants, business people, marketing professionals. But that's the fun of going out there and being an entrepreneur, is learning that. And I think one of Warren Buffett's sayings is, don't learn from your mistakes, learn from other people's mistakes. So
Absolutely right.
that always helps, find out what's going on in the industry, what other people are doing wrong, and then fix it, which applies to you too, right? I mean, in businesses you started, other people weren't doing it or were doing it wrong or weren't taking, were getting their supplies from bad sources or limited sources, and you changed all that.
That's true.
Well, but that's a great saying, but I think you also learn from your own mistakes.
Well, hopefully.
Stewart, do you learn from your mistakes?
I hope so.
Right, that you have to learn from, and those you will never forget.
Yeah, that's right.
That's seared
for
into
sure.
your brain.
Yeah.
That's I call it learning with a cattle prod. It's just seared into your brain.
I thought the most important course I took in my education was mechanical drawing. And you'd have a front view and a top view and an end view, and if that didn't do it, you'd slice it this way or slice it that way. And that was, I think, an important lesson, is to learn at things from all different angles and look at things from all different angles. And I remember my mechanical drawing teacher, the only teacher I could remember, Mr. Barber, and I'd done something wrong, and he was disgusted, and he was pounding on my drawing board. And finally, in utter disgust, he says, "Well, why are you going to school?" And I said, "What?" He says, "Why are you going to school?" I said, "Well, I'm going to school to get an education." He says, "No, you're not." He says, "You're going to get the tools. You're going to school to get the tools with which you're going to get an education all the rest of your life." And that is really true. If we stopped learning when we got out of school, we'd be in big trouble.
Yep.
So true. I feel like a lot of people forget that they need to keep using their brain and growing and continuing to learn. Use it or lose it, as they say.
Right, right.
So one question I have is, if you were starting back at square one today, where would you invest? Would you still go with Berkshire Hathaway, or are there any other companies or industries right now that you're like, okay, that's red hot, that's where I would go?
Yeah, I don't know. Of course, Apple, Amazon have done really well, but it may be
I don't
too
think
late.
they're going anywhere.
It may
Yeah.
be too late. That's the thing, to get the big upside. I'm not sure.
Well, those would be still good ones to hold for a long time, probably, because I
think so,
doubt
too.
either company is going to go upside down anytime soon. So.
I agree.
Yeah. And if you buy into Amazon or something, you might get shares into baby Amazons as they break it up with antitrust.
Hey, I hope that happens. At this rate, though, like, monopolies are just getting bigger and bigger every year, and there's no regulation happening, which is kind of crazy. I mean, I think we're kind of suffering on the competition side of things right now.
It's big tech gets big, and I mean there are acts in place, right? There's the Sherman Act, but
Is it really getting enforced that much right now? I think airline industry is like 90% controlled by like 3 players. Or something.
they just can't keep up. The regulators just can't keep up with the change, I think, is the real issue. And how do you break up? Anyways, this is kind of getting off topic, because how do you break up something like an Amazon or a Google? That's the whole value, and the whole world depends on it. Being able to find.
So how do you
now.
feel about Bitcoin? Stewart?
Well, I think we should start our own. Why don't we start printing something? Mine it. We need to mine something. Yeah.
Virtually mine it.
Yeah, I think that's just crazy. I mean, I know Bill Gates and Warren Buffett said they didn't want anything to do with it, and that's good enough for me. So,
That's pretty
but
good
Warren
advice.
says the only reason anybody buys it is they think somebody's going to pay more for it than you did. And that changed a couple of days ago, didn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's definitely it shouldn't be thought of as a tangible asset. It should be more thought of as almost like a messaging system, because it's a third party. You can just transfer money or Bitcoin or any kind of crypto from one party to another without a third party bank or regulation. So that aspect of crypto definitely it will foster more competition, I think. So I think it has some value, but it's not like as a tangible asset like people think, if that makes sense. But it definitely has some use in transactions.
Well, apparently it works pretty good for blackmail, except they intercepted 3 million of it or something, didn't they, last week?
I think. I mean, not to turn this into a kind of finance show, but Bitcoin is supposed to be a currency replacement, but it's really based on blockchain technology, and that technology is powerful, and it could be used to, they used it to create this sort of cryptocurrencies, and there's a bunch of copycats. That's its own little category, but where it could become very powerful is, for instance, exchanging legal documents or certifying documents or medical records. And that's where I think you're going to see some pretty interesting applications that will be, will make sense. There's value in that.
XRP is one of the cryptos that is kind of supported by a lot of the big banks and used for that function you were just saying. It's not really as much a currency, but more for data transfer.
Right. Data transfer and data archiving securely. Yeah.
Well, we're definitely outside my perimeter of competence now.
So here at the show, we always say we're saving the planet,
One show at a time.
And we try to encourage and really get our guests to do more for the planet. Whether it's just little baby steps, whether it's going to, when you're at the beach picking up trash, or just caring about using less plastic. Are you making any steps to better our planet?
I'm not very focused on that at all. But I do remember our rule. We used to go whitewater rafting through wilderness areas 3 or 6 nights out. And we did have a rule that we were going to bring out more than we took in.
There you go.
So we'd see something laying there, we'd pick it up.
There you go.
Well, so you are doing something. So you care about nature.
Yeah. Oh, very much so, yeah.
I'm sure you want to see our beaches get cleaned up and not see any plastic in the
That's
ocean.
for sure, especially my beach in Barbados. I don't want that stuff out
Well, you
there.
know what? It's going to be my full-time job now to inspire you.
Well, and Paul was saying earlier, it really is sustainable the way that Stewart was able to step up and evolve, like when there were scarcities in certain markets. Because if he hadn't done that, there's a chance that other industries would have grinded to a halt, and then that can be have terrible consequences all over the world in different markets.
Well, right. To put a pin on it, if you can't produce enough steel-belted tires, people are still driving on nylon tires, and you get X number of more deaths every year. And if you're still having to put fluorine gas into the atmosphere, you're getting huge ozone holes and burning us all like ants. And so just the list goes on and on. So I really admire what Stewart's accomplished through all his enterprises, or even having a more humane way of dealing with tax liens. And everybody makes more money and keeps their homes.
See, and that's one of our aspects of our show, because not only do we care about the planet, we care about helping others. And there you are.
And
helping
economic
others.
sustainability is important too, because when more industries are doing well, that allows everyone to evolve quicker, and then in turn, environmental products are developed quicker. So, and
Right.
technological breakthroughs happen quicker too. Like as things move quicker, evolution of products and technology moves quicker too.
So you are saving the planet.
Okay.
Indirectly, but he did.
Well, but what you did was you solved scarcity problems and business problems from your background, which was engineering and business, and in industries you knew. And that's applicable everywhere, and those techniques are applicable everywhere, whether it's insurance, software, finance, whatever app, whatever new need there is out there.
Well, Stewart, it's been a lot of fun talking to you. I think we're about at an hour now, so it's time to wrap things up. But, we've had a lot of fun talking to you and picking your brain and learning some of your wisdom. So thanks for talking to us today.
Well, it's my pleasure, and I wish you guys the best.
We'd love for you to
Thanks.
come back again
Yeah, it was
and give
fun.
us your progress on what little steps you're taking
Oh,
to take plastic
okay.
out of the ocean
Okay,
and help all the fishies.
that's right.
All right.
Saving the planet.
One show at a time.